Oh yeah, everybody was involved 100% in it. I mean, it's just, there were can drives to raise medals. We would take cans to school. We would collect tin cans and old metal of any kind, scrap metal, and that would go to school, and they'd gather it up, and then it could to some central collection point, and that metal would be melted down and made into guns and ships and tanks and all that stuff.
My mother had three brothers in the war.
Yeah.
And her fourth brother died missing in action in Vietnam.
In Vietnam, yeah, he was killed in action. But
her three brothers were in the war, and a lot of boys from our street, several boys from our street didn't come back. I remember that.
Yeah, our dad was in World War One, and then when World War II broke out, he was over 40 when when Pearl Harbor hit. He was over 40, but he wanted to get involved in it, so he ended up, he joined the Coast Guard, like an auxiliary or reserve. And his duty used to be on weekends. He would pull himself away from his business, and he'd go up to Buffalo, drive to Buffalo, and go on watch.
Guard at the waterfront.
He would go on harbor watch at the Buffalo Harbor.
Yeah.
Up in the tower with the binoculars, looking for submarines. There was a great fear that there were German submarines in the Great Lakes, and they were going to bomb our cities. And Buffalo was right on the shore of Lake Erie, So I don't think they ever found any there. There were, a lot of them along the Atlantic coast and through the Carolinas up to New York. There were German subs off the Atlantic coast in World War II, but they didn't get into the Great Lakes that I know of. So, but there was a great fear of that. And I really think our dad, he was patriotic, and I think that drove him a lot, but he also got extra ration stamps for tires and gasoline because he had to drive that. So I'm not sure if his motive was split there or not.
And when you mentioned rationing, oh my goodness. Our first experience without using butter was oleo. And they gave you a little capsule of color. And you had to stir the color into the oleo because it looked like lard. Mm. It was awful.
Did you ever eat a candle? That's what it tasted like.
Silk stockings went out.
Meat?
Yeah, I always wore silk stockings, and the first pair of nylons I had felt terrible on my legs because we were used to silk, and you couldn't get silk. At first they were rationed, and then they were non-existent. Yeah.
Women would go without stockings during the war because they didn't have the money or the ration stamps to buy stockings with. And all the silk stockings had a seam that went up the back of the leg then because that's how they made them. There had to be this slight seam up the back. So the women that wouldn't wear stockings, so they wouldn't get chastised for being undressed in public, they might put makeup on their legs to make it look like they had stockings on. And then they'd take their eyebrow pencil and draw a line for the seam down the back of their leg to make it look like they had stockings on. So but then nylon was invented, and then nylon stockings became the thing. Yeah.
Meat was a big thing that was rationed. That was a great shortage of meat.
And anything that came from South America, because the German submarines were patrolling in those waters between the Americas, and ships just couldn't get through. And the rationing covered the stuff that was needed for the war effort. Steel, rubber, other commodities like that were needed in big supply for the war effort. And B, they were for items that we couldn't get, import items, like rubber, for example.
Gasoline.
Gasoline came from offshore at that time.
Spend your precious stamps for $5 worth of gas.
And you were only allotted, so it was individual formula of allotment according to how big your family was and what you might have done for a living, how much you had to drive. in your to get to work or whatever. No, we didn't even own a car, so that part was easy. So
Just shortages mainly.
shortages, stand in line for things.
Getting used to air raids.
Yeah, have air raid drills at night. We never had any planes or bombing, but we had air raid drills at night where you had to turn off all the lights, and they had volunteer air raid wardens around the neighborhood who would walk around with an armband and a big fire extinguisher. I never understood why they had that. They had to haul that thing around, and a helmet.
I used to be frightened when the lights would go all off, and I would go down and sit on the bottom step of the outside of the bar, so I could hear voices and I'd feel safer. So every time there was an air drill, I went down on the bottom step of our apartment and sat there until the lights came back on.
There were aircraft plants quite near our home, and I know Bell Aircraft was, as the crow flies, maybe less than 10 miles from our house. And when they'd finished they built fighter planes. And when they'd finished the fighter planes, the planes would take off there and fly to the coast to be shipped overseas in the war. And boy, sometimes the sky would turn dark with fighter planes. But boy, to be a young boy at that time, it was just the most romantic thing in the world to see those planes going overhead and imagine you were one of the pilots.